So without further ado, come on up, Hannah.
Hello, everyone. How's it going? That was good. Okay, so I'm super excited. Okay, there we go. There are my slides. Perfect. I'm very excited to come and talk to you guys today. It's pretty crazy to me because just a handful of years ago, I was sitting here at the summer version of Awake and Alive, so I know what it's like to be here. I know for me, at the time, I was going through some pretty rough things in college, a couple of which we're going to talk about today. Yay! So I know that Awake and Alive was something that really gave me some hope in all of the things that were going on in my life. So I hope that today I can give you guys some rejuvenation as well as we go through this. So let's do it. I'm going to start off just by giving a little bit of an introduction in case you don't know who I am. So as said, I'm Hannah Schermerhorn. I went to Milwaukee School of Engineering, and I graduated with degrees in electrical engineering and technical communications. I then worked at a law firm for a year where I did patent writing. Patents are basically the most boring form of writing, is what I have found. So after a year, I was like, man, this is not the right job for me. So I switched to a role at Rockwell Automation, which is the clock tower in downtown Milwaukee. And I did product marketing there, eventually did some global marketing. And then last year, I got published. So then in February of this year, I had my book come out, which we talked about, A Single Life to Live. So I basically wrote that book because I was single for about 6-7 years, and I was very mad about being single when I first became single. And then at the end of kind of those 6-7 years, I was like, man, I love my life, and I'm so happy with where I'm at. So I decided to write a book about every single thing that I learned. So that is what that book is, if that is of any interest to you. So that's me. Just one other fun fact is that last November I also got married. So my name is Hannah Greffy as well. So God has a sense of humor where I had this book on singleness coming out, and then it's like, oh, here's your person that you asked for so long ago, and now here he is. So that's where I'm at. Okay, let's dive in today. So I want to start by asking you guys the question, is life going how you planned? Or thanks, that was much easier than I expected. Yes, I know for me, a lot of times I have these big expectations, and then reality sets in, and it's a lot smaller and looks a lot different than what I expected. And what I have in between there is just disappointment, because I'm like, man, I thought life was going to go this way. I thought this thing was going to happen, and then it doesn't. So I'm just not happy with how my life is going. And I just want to see where you guys are at right now. So I have a couple categories that were pretty big for me with disappointment, and I want to see if you guys are kind of in the same areas or not. So the first one is career in school. Has anyone felt disappointment in that area or is currently feeling disappointment in that area? Yeah, I'm seeing some head nods, some arms raised. Yeah, this is such a hard area, especially in the ages of 18 to 25. There is so much going on. I know for me, when I was around the age of 18, it's like, okay, you gotta figure out what you're gonna do for the rest of your life. And it's like, I have no idea what I wanna do. So for me, I was like, I'm good at math, I'll do engineering, right? That's gonna be great. And then I did engineering, and it was so hard, and it was so difficult, and it was not what I expected it to be. And then after that, you have to get into a career and apply for things, and you might start a job, and you're like, I thought this was going to be so different than what I expected. So just kind of a series of things in my life where school, career were not really what I expected it to be. So then another big area for me is relationships. Woo! Has anyone felt disappointment with relationships? Either in the past, or now, yeah, I'm seeing some high hands raised. That's pretty good. It can be something like family or friends or coworkers or classmates where they're not just living up to your expectations, or maybe something has happened to them that you're like, I didn't expect them to get sick or have this bad thing happen. Or it can be the really big one for me, which was finding a significant other. That was the area I was so disappointed in. I know some people have never gone on dates and they're like, I thought I would at least be dating by now or find someone. Or maybe you've been broken up with or been in relationships that didn't go well and you're like, this is not the plan. Or maybe you've dated a ton and you're just so sick of going on dates and not meeting the right person. This area can be so hard. It's so hard, I wrote a whole book about it, so I totally get it. And then another area that can hold disappointment is ourselves. For me, I have very high expectations of myself and what I'm going to do. A lot of times I think, oh, I'm going to accomplish this and achieve this, and then it turns out I'm not perfect, so I can't do any of those things. So I can really struggle with that. But it can also be things like our own health might disappoint us, or it might be something like a sin or a situation we got into and we just didn't act the way that we thought we were going to act, and we carry that with us for a long period of time. So these are kind of the depressing part of the presentation, where we're thinking about all these things that are bringing disappointment. And it might have been some of the things I talked about. It may have been something totally different. But if you have experienced disappointment or are currently experiencing it, then I am so glad that you guys are here, because I had such disappointment in my life. But in that disappointment, God showed me just how good He is and what He can really accomplish in it. And if I had never been through that, I would not have known that. So I want to encourage you guys today that if you're experiencing anything with disappointment, that God is working with it and He has a plan for you. So I'm going to share 3 stories today to kind of show you all of the things that I learned in a very short period of time. The first story is going to be my own story, which is my least favorite story, at least in the beginning. So when I went to college, I thought that I was going to find someone. My mom and my dad and my brother and sister-in-law had all met in high school, and then they had dated in college and gotten married, and I hadn't found anyone in high school, so I was like, okay, college, I'm gonna find my person and I'm gonna get married. That is the plan. So I started dating in college. I found someone who checked all the boxes of what I was looking for. They were super passionate about their faith and smart and caring and all the things. And we dated for all of college, and then we're like, okay, we're ready to take this next step and get married. So in our senior year, we got engaged and we planned where we wanted to live, how many kids we wanted to have, basically everything that we wanted to do with our lives. As we were planning our wedding, our photographer sent us these books, and it was, How Well Do You Know Your Fiancé? So there's a his and a hers, and in the books there are all these kind of, general questions like, what's their favorite food, or what's their favorite music? And I was like, okay, this is great, let's do this. But then in my book, I had this one very serious question, and it said, has he gotten over an addiction? And my fiance had struggled with addiction, and we had done a lot of counseling and different things to try to move past that, and we had said we weren't going to move into marriage until that was really under control. But when I answered in this book, he was honest with me, and he was like, nope, I'm not actually past this, and it's been pretty bad for a long period of time, and I haven't been open about it. So my expectation for marriage and everything moving forward was just totally dashed. I was devastated and did not know how to move forward. So we tried to make it work for a couple months. It was very rough and very hard to see, should we get married, should we not, what should we do? But then one day he came to me and he basically said that what he was doing was not a sin, and that it was my fault that we were having issues, and that other people would be okay with what he was doing. So that was definitely the hardest conversation I've had in my life, but it opened up my eyes to see that marriage was not what I was supposed to be doing right now. So I ended the relationship, and I was in a place I never thought that I would be in again, and that's that I was single, and I was just horrified and so sad to be there. So my expectations for life were just dashed in that moment. And as that was happening, all these other things started to happen as well. So my mom had a cancer scare, and then my grandpa passed away, and then I was walking through school, and all of a sudden my eye just stopped working, and I went blind in one of my eyes. And as I went to the doctor, I had seizures from the tests. So I was in the emergency room, and my doctor called me, and he's like, we found out what's wrong with your eye. You just have to get shots in it every month to make it heal. So I was in the emergency room, and I was just devastated, because I'm like, All of these things have been such disappointments for me. My health doesn't work. My family isn't, what I thought it would be. I could just lose them. And my relationship, which was so important to me, is not happening anymore. So I saw that was just a way that I was setting myself up to have so much disappointment, because I realized that I was putting my identity into all of those things I had expectations for. And by doing that, I allowed myself to reach a really low place. So that's my first takeaway. Unmet expectations show us what we're building our identity on. So I want you guys to just think about the different things that aren't going according to plan right now and think, am I putting some of my identity in that? Am I saying that the relationship that isn't happening, that's what would have made me matter? If I got that job, that would have made me matter. If I, would have gotten that significant other, or that promotion, or into that different major, would that have made me a better person or made me like myself better? Because what I found with mine, when all of those things were taken away, was that there was only one identity that I should be putting myself in. And that is the fact that I was not my disappointments. The only identity that mattered is that God loved me. And I know this sounds super, super simple. We've been hearing this from the time we were little, if we're Christian, that Jesus loves me. But to have our identity in God means that when something goes wrong, God has plans for us. It means he loves us so much that he came and he died for us so that we could spend forever in heaven. It means no matter what doesn't go according to our plans, God has such bigger plans that we can't see, and we can trust in him because he is good. So I want to tell another story that really illustrates this, and it's one of my favorite stories in the Bible because whenever I speak, it just is so applicable to so many different facets of things. So Lazarus has so much good nuggets in it. I love reading it, but we're just going to go through a few verses today. So I want you guys to pay attention to the different people who have expectations on Jesus in this story. It starts off in John 11. Now a man named Lazarus was sick. He was from Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. So the sisters sent word to Jesus, "Lord, the one you love is sick." Now Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. So when he heard that Lazarus was sick, he stayed where he was 2 more days. And then he said to his disciples, "Let us go back to Judea." Okay, now right away, we have some expectations on Jesus. We have Mary and Martha, and probably Lazarus as well, know that Jesus can heal Lazarus. So they're like, okay, hopefully Jesus can come and help us. But as this highlighted word says, Jesus loved them. So he chose not to do the thing that they were asking for. So Jesus decides to go to them. He tells his disciples, and this is what happens. "But Rabbi," they said, "a short while ago, the Jews there tried to stone you, and yet you are going back?" So then he said to them plainly, "Lazarus is dead, and for your sake I'm glad I was not there, so that you may believe. But let us go to him." Then Thomas said to the rest of the disciples, "Let us also go that we may die with him." Man, pretty bold of the disciples. So on one hand, we have Mary, Martha, Lazarus, like, "Jesus, come, heal us." And then we've got the disciples who are like, "Jesus, if you go, you're going to die." So 2 very different expectations on Jesus. And I feel like this is a picture into what God sees probably a lot of times, where people are praying and they're asking for things, and it's just probably the exact opposite, where God's like, well, this person wants this person wants this, but this is what I'm going to do. So just a little nugget of insight there. So Jesus goes, and on his arrival, Jesus found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb for 4 days. When Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went out to meet him, but Mary stayed at home. "Lord," Martha said to Jesus, "if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But I know that even now, God will give you whatever you ask." Jesus said to her, "Your brother will rise again." Martha answered, "I know he will rise again in the resurrection at the last day." She went back and called her sister Mary aside. "The teacher is here," she said, "and is asking for you." When Mary reached the place where Jesus was and saw him, she fell at his feet and said, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." So again, both Mary and Martha are devastated because they know that Jesus could have done something, but he chose not to. When Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who had come along with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in spirit and troubled. "Where have you laid him?" he asked. "Come and see, Lord," they replied. Jesus wept. Then the Jews said, "See how he loved him?" But some of them said, "Could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man have kept this man from dying?" Now, I want to just pause here and focus on those two words, Jesus wept. Because in a matter of moments, Jesus is going to raise Lazarus from the dead. Sorry to spoil that for you if you didn't know that. But instead of Jesus just going, "Don't worry, guys, it's going to be totally fine. You just need to trust in me. You just need to believe in me. You shouldn't be upset about what's going on," Jesus is meeting them exactly where he's at. He's feeling their pain with them, and he's crying with them. And the same thing is true for you and me. God knows what's going to happen in our life. He knows that we're going to be with him in heaven, and we're going to be so excited and so happy. But he's not just saying, "You're not trusting in me, otherwise you'd be happy." He's going, "You're feeling this, and I'm feeling this too, and I care. I'm crying with you in your pain." So God knows what your disappointments are, and he cares about what you're feeling with them. So then comes the happy ending. Jesus, once more deeply moved, came to the tomb. Then Jesus looked up and said, "Father, I thank you that you have heard me. I know that you always hear me, but I said this for the benefit of the people standing here, that they may believe that you sent me." When he said this, Jesus called in a loud voice, "Lazarus, come out." The dead man came out, his hands and feet wrapped with strips and linen, and a cloth around his face. Jesus said to them, "Take off the grave clothes and let him go." So what we have here is, again, our nice chart. We had expectations from Jesus' disciples of "don't go or you're going to die." We had expectations from Mary and Martha of "please come and heal Lazarus." But instead of having a smaller reality and not meeting those expectations, Jesus came in and he completely blew their expectations away. You see, Jesus could have just done another miracle. He could have healed Lazarus. But instead, he allowed people to be disappointed. He allowed people to suffer. And as a result, he raised Lazarus from the dead, which was so much more impactful than what they had originally asked for. So this is what happened as a result. Meanwhile, a large crowd of Jews found out that Jesus was there and came not only because of him, but also to see Lazarus, whom he had raised from the dead. So the chief priests made plans to kill Lazarus as well, for on account of him, many of the Jews were going over to Jesus and believing in him. And then later in John 12 it says, "Now that crowd that was with him when he called Lazarus from the tomb and raised him from the dead continued to spread the word. Many people, because they had heard that he had performed the sign, went out to meet him. So the Pharisees said to one another, 'See, this is getting us nowhere. Look how the whole world has gone after him.'" Again, if Jesus would have just done another miracle, people would have believed in him. But instead, he decided to raise someone from the dead and have such a bigger impact on the world. So many more people might be in heaven because Jesus allowed disappointment in the beginning, only to have such higher expectations in the end, which is the next takeaway. Unmet expectations leave the door open for God to exceed our expectations. This was the case for Lazarus, and this was also the case for me. So out of my biggest disappointments of not getting engaged, of God allowing my relationship to break off, and me praying and begging God to make it work, to make something happen, I had so much pain and I had so much agony. But out of that, all of a sudden my heart started changing. It forced me to realize that my identity was in the wrong place. And then I had this whisper of writing a book, and the whisper became louder and louder until I wrote the book, and then I got an agent, and I got a publisher, and now my book is out. And now I have an entire career around something that came out of the biggest disappointment in my life. I could have never imagined what God would do when he was saying no to please let this relationship work. And he can do the same thing for you guys too. So you may be feeling like, oh, I have these disappointments in my life and it looks so bad right now, but just wait and see what God can do with them. It's pretty incredible. God's shown me it in a very small way, in a very few years in my life, but as your life unfolds, I feel like I've seen that more and more. So I want to share one more story that's been impactful to me that really drew this home for me. So this one is a fake story, unlike the other two. And this one is from the Chronicles of Narnia. Has anyone read The Horse and His Boy? Yeah? Okay, this is good. I've talked about this before, and sometimes no one raises their hands, and I'm like, oh, this is so sad. So if you haven't read it, I'm sorry, because I'm going to totally spoil it for you. I'm going to give a high-level overview of it, but it's not everything, so you should still read it. So in in this book, the main character is Shasta, and I love this book so much that I just named my Samoyed puppy Shasta after the main character, so it's pretty good. So Shasta is found as a little baby, and he's in a boat in the sea with no parents, no one around, so he was abandoned, something terrible happened. But thankfully, these fishermen find him, and they take him in, and they decide to raise him. So they raise him, but then one day he overhears the fishermen talking about the fact that they're going to sell him into slavery. So obviously he's very devastated, very upset, and he goes into the barn and he's like, "What is going on? This is terrible. I can't be sold into slavery." But there's this horse in the barn, and since the horse is from Narnia, it's a talking horse. So the talking horse starts talking back, and he's like, "I got captured from Narnia, so I was sold into slavery here, and I want to make it back to Narnia." So the boy and the horse, the name of the book, decide to journey together to Narnia to try to get to freedom. So they start going, and as they go, there's this girl, Arvis, and she is escaping from an arranged marriage, and this lion comes out of nowhere and starts chasing her. So she gets chased, and she meets up with Shasta and the horse, and they start journeying together. And as they're journeying, all these crazy things happen, but eventually they meet up with the royalty of Narnia, who's in a different kingdom. And they're in this kingdom to see if they want an arranged marriage between Narnia and this kingdom, but they find out the kingdom's pretty bad, so they're like, "No, we don't want to have this marriage." But they're like, "This kingdom's going to be super mad when we find out that we're not going to do this." So they decide to sneak away, and they're like, "We need to warn the king because they're going to attack us right after they find out that this marriage isn't happening." So Shasta and the Narnians and everyone start journeying away and sneaking away from this kingdom. But as they're sneaking away, all of a sudden this lion comes out of nowhere and starts chasing Shasta. And then Shasta gets all by himself, and he gets separated from the group, and he starts journeying up this mountain, and it gets all misty. And he starts just feeling so sorry for himself. He's like, "All these terrible things have been happening to me." And as he's talking, this voice from the mist starts talking back to him, and he's not like that weirded out by it. He's just like, "Okay, I'll keep talking." So he's like, "I was found abandoned in a boat, and then these people took me in, but they were going to sell me into slavery. And then this lion came out of nowhere and started chasing my friend. And then I met up with these cool Narnians, but then another lion came out of nowhere and started chasing my friend," and he's just feeling so sorry about all of the things that have happened in his life, how it hasn't gone according to how he planned. And then it comes here. "Don't you think it was bad luck to meet so many lions?" said Shasta. "There is only one lion," said the voice. "What on earth do you mean? I've just told you there were at least 2 the first night, and there was only one, but he was swift of foot." "How do you know?" "I was the lion." And as Shasta gaped with open mouth and said nothing, the voice continued. "I was the lion who forced you to join with Arvis. I was the cat who comforted you among the houses of the dead. I was the lion who drove the jackals from you while you slept. I was the lion who gave the horses the new strength of fear for the last mile so that you should reach King Lune in time. And I was the lion you do not remember who pushed the boat in which you lay, a child near death, that came to shore where a man sat wakeful at midnight to receive you. Then it was you who wounded Arvis? It was I. But what for?" "Child," said the voice, "I am telling you your story, not hers. I tell no one any story but his own." "Who are you?" asked Shasta. "Myself," said the voice, very deep and low so that the earth shook. And again, "Myself," loud and clear and gay. And then the third time, "Myself," whispered so softly you could hardly hear it. And yet it seemed to come from all around you as if the leaves rustled with it. Shasta was no longer afraid that the voice belonged to something that would eat him, nor that it was the voice of a ghost, but a new and different sort of trembling came over him, yet he felt glad too. The mist was turning from black to gray and from gray to white. This must have begun to happen some time ago, but while he had been talking to the thing, he had not noticed anything else. Now the whiteness around him became a shining whiteness. His eyes began to blink. Somewhere ahead, he could hear birds singing. He knew the night was over at last. He could see the mane and ears and head of his horse quite easily now. A golden light fell on them from the left. He thought it was the sun. He turned and saw, pacing beside him, taller than the horse, a lion. The horse did not seem to be afraid of it, or else could not see it. It was from the lion that the light came. No one ever saw anything more terrible or beautiful. And I feel like when we die, we're going to have a very similar experience to that, where we think, all of these bad things happen to me in my life. There's the time where I had that heartbreak. There's the time that was so bad that I didn't think I could continue. There's the time that I didn't get the job or didn't get the promotion that I thought I was going to get. And we're going to have this story of all of these bad things that have happened, and we're going to wonder what was going on in that. But then God's going to show us the actual story of what was going on in our life. And he's going to show us, you know, that time you had heartbreak? It's because I was preventing you from getting into this bad experience. Or that time that you felt you couldn't continue, I was right there with you, strengthening you. And that time you didn't get the job or the promotion, it was because there was something so much better that was beyond that time for you. So if I would have given you those things when you asked, you wouldn't have experienced those greater things later. And I think we're just going to be in total awe as we see what God was doing, not only in our own lives, but in the impact of the entire kingdom. So if you guys are experiencing disappointment today, don't lose heart. God is working things out for your good. He promises that. He promises that he's with you and that he's going to work everything out for good. So do not be sad. Do not be scared in it. I know it can be so easy to focus on those disappointments. God has a plan, and he promises that for you. Thank you, guys.